She's one of the faces of the movement that followed after Michael Brown was killed. And she's a poet, she's an activist, and a storyteller. Give it up for Shiraz Warren.
Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
And good evening. I am honored to be your host for the evening. My name is Shiraz Warren. And on the morning of August 9th, 2014, I remember being in my bedroom, and I rolled over on my right side and stared at the wall in front of me because I was completely confused on why my bedroom was so cold. See, I lived on the first floor apartment in University City, and I think my apartment forgot that it was an apartment and not a basement, because for some reason it just trapped in the cold, and I started having some issues with that. Because I was like, why is it August and I'm having winter negotiations with myself? And you all know what winter negotiations are. Example, if I lay in this bed about 10 to 20 more minutes under these covers, magically, the house is going to get warmer. Or maybe if I stick my leg out from under this sheet, then, my body will kind of get acclimated to the cold in the house, and I'll go ahead and jump on up out of this bed and get my day started, right? So I did the most sensible thing, the most logical thing. I lay there for about another 10 to 20 minutes. And I eventually, went on ahead and got up out my bed and just slowly walked myself out of my bedroom, through my hallway, and into my dining room. Because I was spending a lot of time in my dining room at that time. My dining room table would be from edge to edge, bone-white sheets of paper, 8.5 by 11, with poems typed out on them, spanning the 14 years of my life. Because it was the only thing that was keeping me sane at that time. Because about a week and a half before that day, I started grieving. See, on August 14th of 2013, my baby brother John was killed in the city of St. Louis. And this grieving pregame for me kind of looked like me sitting down at my dining room table with a cup of coffee, shuffling through the different pieces of poetry. And as I was sitting there that day, in the silence of my home, because my home was freakishly quiet. Like you can hear the hum of my refrigerator and the ambient sounds of just trees and birds outside. And then all of a sudden I was interrupted by these rapid dings from my phone. All these different notifications start coming in from Twitter and Facebook and text messages. And at first I didn't pay it any mind. And then I decided to pick up my phone. And these images had flooded in. And there was text that accompanied these images. Some of these messages said, "Rise, the Ferguson police just shot a boy." To rise, it's a dead body out on Canfield Drive. And I remember going to Facebook and seeing the picture of Michael Brown's stepfather holding a sign saying that the Ferguson PD had just executed his son. And I went more inward into my grief. And as time went by, more images came in. And the only thing I could think was, dear God, I hope his brothers and sisters are nowhere around to see these. Because as a person who was already preparing for the 1-year anniversary of my own brother's killing, the only thing I could think about was who is taking care of Michael Brown Jr.'s brothers and sisters. Fast forward, August 14th, the 1-year anniversary of my brother's murder. I was at the butcher on Florissant. And as I looked around at people, I wondered how many folks out there were dealing with compounded issues. Because I knew that I was not unique in that situation. I knew that I was not the only person who had lost a loved one and was grieving that. And I still wonder that to this day. The storytellers that we are bringing up this evening have put their hearts and souls into their stories. And I will humbly ask you all to honor them by granting them your full attention. Because this is not easy work to do. To stand before an audience and to put your heart and your most vulnerable thoughts out to the public. And I would like for us to be mindful that we are in a sanctuary. And for us to remember what that word means. Safety. So with no further ado, I would like to bring up our first storyteller, Mr. Gregory Carr.
August 9, 2014 taught me 3 valuable lessons. The first lesson is the power of social media. The second lesson it taught me is that when you step outside of your comfort zone, you learn more about yourself. And the third lesson is learn to see life through other people's eyes. You see, August 9th, 2014 was a day like any other day. I was out fishing with my brother Daryl, and we were over in East St. Louis at Frank Holden Park. And we were out there about 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was about 80 degrees already, so it's one of those hot, sticky St. Louis days that sticks to your t-shirt. You know, you're just already wet with sweat. And we didn't catch anything. And so I drove him home to Florissant, and I dropped him off, and I simply told my brother, I said, I don't want to drive down West Florissant because I don't want Ferguson police to harass me. So I took 270 to 170 to 70 back to my home in Normandy. The first thing I did, like I always do, is I got on Facebook and started looking at what was on my timeline. And as I began to look, I started to see very distressing messages about a young man being killed, a young man laying in the street. And when I jumped on Twitter, I saw somebody say, OMFG. I just saw somebody die today, bro. Fast forward a week later, August 16th. By this time, I had become a fully engaged social media warrior, and I'm debating everybody on social media, and I'm debating back and forth about police brutality, what is really a riot. And yes, I unfriended a whole lot of people. But there was one message that stood out to me. It was a high school friend of mine. Her name was Adrian. And she started talking about the conditions of her neighborhood. And she was talking about the sound of gunfire and protesters and police. and she asked a very poignant question. She said, "Am I crazy?" And I simply said, "No, Adrian, you're not crazy. It sounds like what you described for us are conditions of war. And maybe you're suffering from PTSD. Is there anything I can do for you?" She said, "Yes. Could you please bring me some groceries? I can't get out of my subdivision. I need basic staples like milk and eggs and bread. And could you bring me some magazines? Because helping me to get away from this, I could just read a little while, to get away for a little while." This was also my last weekend of being able to have some freedom because I had to start school in a very short time, and this was my orientation week for Harris Stowe. And that Monday, I got busy with meeting with administrators and going to departmental meetings that the day got away from me. And it was 8 o'clock at night, and I called Adrian. I said, "Adrian, I'm so sorry, the day got away from me. And I have the groceries for you. Can I come over?" She said, "No." Very sharply, "It's too late." I said, "But it's 8 o'clock. It can't." She said, "They don't allow anybody in Ferguson after 5 o'clock. There's a 5 o'clock curfew. Unless you live here, you can't come in here. So, can you come back tomorrow around 3 o'clock? I said, "Sure. That'd be a better time." So I'm driving down Lucas and Hunt. And as I'm stopped at the stoplight on Lucas and Hunt, suddenly there is a convoy of Humvees, and suddenly I am boxed in by Humvees and National Guardsmen. And we're driving down Lucas and Hunt, and I was so relieved to make a left turn to get away from them because they went on straight ahead to the Target parking lot where there were hundreds of news trucks and other Humvees. I shortly turned into Adrian's subdivision, and I went inside. I knocked on the door, and she gave me a big hug. I brought her the groceries. I said, "How are you doing, Adrian?" She said, I'm managing." I said, "Well, we don't have to talk about the Mike Brown incident right now. We don't have to talk about everything you talked about on Facebook." I said, "I haven't seen you in so long." I said, "Tell me something about yourself," because I hadn't seen her in 20 years. She said, "Well, I have 2 twin boys. They're young men. They're 20 years old. They both have dreadlocks, and I'm worried about them all the time because they get racially profiled." And I said, "Well, I have a 13-year-old. He loves soccer, and he's a happy-go-lucky kid. He walks around with earbuds in his ears, and he's not very attentive at times to his surroundings. And I'm concerned about him, too, because he's big for his age. So we have that in common, that we were both concerned parents." And then all at once, our conversation was interrupted by a fly. And Adrian became fixated with this fly, and she would not stop until she killed this fly. 10 minutes later, she sat down and she was shaking. I said, "Adrian, are you okay?" She said, "No." I said, "Why did you need to kill that fly?" She said, "Because that fly was so loud. It was as loud as the helicopter that's been over my house for 10 days straight. And the lights pouring into my bedroom window that I cannot sleep, and the sound of gunfire." And she was very upset. And just as I went to console her, there was a knock at the door. And she said, "You're the only person I invited over. Who could it be?" I said, "I don't know. This is your house." She said, "Well, could you answer?" I said, "This is your house. What do I do?" She said, "Could you please answer it?" I said, "Okay." So I walked to the door, and I opened the door, and there was a young white man. He had a blue Oxford shirt, blue jeans, and tennis shoes. He had an arm full of "I Heart Ferguson" signs. And he said, "Can I put a sign on your front lawn? Because we want to show that Ferguson is united. This is not the Ferguson we know, because the media is painting Ferguson in a very bad light." I said, "Well, sir, I don't live here. I'm just visiting with my friend." I said, "You might want to address it to her." And so, "Would you like to come in?" So he came in, and he said, "Well, I'm from Ferguson, and I am a product of the Ferguson Forest Schools. I went to McClure, and I had a lot of black friends. And we all got along. We didn't have any racial problems." And of course, Adrian and I looked at each other with a side eye, and we nodded. And then suddenly we're having this conversation about this sign. And he said, "I really need you to put this sign in your front lawn because it shows that we're unified." And Adrian simply said, "I'm just not quite ready to put that sign in my yard." He said, "No, I think it would be a really good sign to put in your yard." And I realized it was no longer a request, but a demand. And so I stepped in and I said, "I think she's told you she doesn't want to put the sign in her yard. I think you should respect it." "Well, I think it's a good sign." I said, "It might be, but I don't think she wants to put it in her yard just yet. And I think you should respect that." And just as he's about to leave, he said, well, would you like to have one? And I said, okay, I'll take one. He said, because we need people outside of Ferguson to realize that this is not the Ferguson that we grew up in. I said, okay, well, very good. And he went on his way, and he went on to the other houses down the street. Days later, I received a phone call because of a viral interview that I did online, that I had an opportunity to go on NPR with The Takeaway with John Hockenberry. And they asked me to bring my son because I talked about in this interview how I had to have the talk with my son. So as we're sitting in the studio preparing, he said, I'm going to ask a question. And Dad, I don't want you to interrupt. I said, all right. And he asked my son a very pointed question. He said, Gregory, have you ever been racially profiled by the police? Have you ever been afraid of the police? And I looked at him because I didn't know what to say. Because we just had to talk the night before. He said, yes. Yes, I have. And I am in shock because we have not talked about this. And he said, tell me about it. He said, we got racially profiled coming from a basketball game in South County, and the police stopped us and they put the flashlights in our eyes and they harassed our coach and they harassed every single one of us. So what do I take away from this? I say that social media is a powerful weapon, because if it weren't for social media, I would have never seen the seriousness and the gravity of what happened to Mike Brown. Mike Brown's body laid on that ground for 4.5 hours in 90-degree heat, and all the world was able to see it. Had it not been for social media, I wouldn't have stepped outside of my comfort zone and asked Adrian, what could I do to help you? And I learned about not only who she was, but I learned about more of who I was. And lastly, I got to see life through somebody else's eyes. Because I started thinking about how much I wanted to protect Adrian from this person who wanted to force this sign on her. And I started thinking about my happy-go-lucky 13-year-old son who was asked this very adult-like question, and I wanted to protect him, but I couldn't. And then I started thinking about Adrian's 2 sons with dreadlocks who get profiled, but she could still touch them and say hello to them and hug them. And I could still say hello to my 13-year-old son who's now 18 years old and just went to college. But Mike Brown Sr. and Leslie McSpadden, all they have is memories. Because then I realized that Mike Brown wasn't just their son. He was our son too. Thank you.
Mr. Carr, why was it important for you to tell this particular story?
Why was it important to tell this particular story is because that incident that happened with my friend Adrian and I was like a microcosm of what's wrong with race relations in America. People are busy talking at each other, not talking to each other, and people are not listening. What Adrian clearly articulated was, I need some time to think about this. And I don't want to jump on this bandwagon and put this sign, because this sign wasn't just a sign, it was political. It was loaded with politics. It was loaded with innuendo. And she said, no, I'm not going to let you force that on me. But this young man was so insistent, he wasn't really asking. He was simply telling her, this is what you're going to do. And that's what's been wrong with America, is we don't listen, we try to tell people what to do. And Ferguson is simply a microcosm of what's happening in America. And I don't have to tell you, all you need to do is turn on any of the cable news networks to see what's going on in America. White supremacists shooting people for the color of their skin. But we need to change this. And the only way we can change this is to stand up, speak our truths, make our voices heard, and reach out to one another.
Thank you again, Gregory Carr. And we know that the content of this evening, for the lack of a better term, for some may be triggering. Being in this very space this evening is bringing back a lot of memories for people who are present in this space. So I would like the representatives from behavioral health response to stand up. This evening we have VHR in the room. Everybody give them a round of applause. So behavioral health response, they are in control of the 24-hour suicide hotline here in Missouri. They also provide counseling and 24-hour counseling. And we have them on site this evening for them to assist anyone who may be in need of their services or in need of a referral. So thank you again, VHR, for being present in this space, for giving up your service. Thank you. And it is my honor to bring up our next storyteller, Aziza Boyd.
Good evening.
Good evening.
If anyone would have even hinted that I had an issue with not loving black men, with not supporting black men, with not caring about black men, I would have been very upset, to say the least. My first response probably would have been something like, I have black brothers, black nephews, and cousins, so you must not know me very well at all. Probably a few expletives, which I choose not to say in this space, and add to. But by the summer of 2014, I would be faced with a reality that terrified me and made me feel ashamed. Neither one of those things would keep me from uncovering the truth, my truth. I met my best friend Dannie in 2013. We were both at a friend's home filled with area black poets who were like the dopest people in the world. It was amazing. And Dannie struck me as kinder and sweeter than I'd really ever known a man to be. I kind of gave him some points in my book. It would be months later before Dannie and I would link up again. He reached out to me to ask me to photograph a reunion event that he didn't have capacity to do himself. Those conversations led to us really getting to know each other better. I mean, this brother was really cool. We talked for hours on end about everything the same way. We hung out, we went to the movies, went out to eat. But there was one thing that was missing. Dannie had never actually been in my home. No, he came by, picked me up, hung out places, but that was different than being in the house. So it was a little after midnight. Dannie hit me up. That's not unusual. But this time he wanted to come by. Hey Z, what you up to? I responded, oh, I'm just chilling, doing some editing. What about you? Oh, well, I'm in the area and I just wanted to stop by. Yo! This is me with my phone. You want to do what? I mean, I'm a lesbian, he's straight, it should be cool. But I'm still a woman. He's a man. Oh no. So I sat there frozen and a little confused. Why was I afraid to let my friend come through? I mean, if it was my homegirl, yeah, come on, girl. Come chill. So I responded, you know what? I'm actually getting a little tired, girl. I'll catch you another time. Dannie's response was probably something chill, like, oh, Pastor perverted. Or so I thought. That night, I had nightmares about my friend. He wasn't my friend in these nightmares. He was something else. I woke up crying that next morning, confused. Why had someone so kind and sweet who I enjoyed in my life triggered such fear for me with a simple request to hang out? That afternoon, Danny texted again. Hey, Ziza, what you up to? I'm chilling, just editing. What about you? Yo, I'm in the neighborhood. Maybe I can stop by since it was too late yesterday. Okay. Because by this time, I figured I needed to fix this. I needed to move past it. So I was still afraid, but I said, yeah, man, come through. We can have some lunch. I immediately got on the horn, texting my friend Allison. Allison, hey, I need a favor, friend. Danny's coming over for the first time, and can you come over at the same time? She was like, cool, no problem. Didn't even ask me why. Great. So it's all set. Allison will be here, Danny will come over, I'll make adult lunch, because I can't cook. We'll have a good time, they'll leave along with the fear, right? Okay. So, Allison came over a little bit before Danny. She comes in, and Freya, what's going on? I'm just chilling. We just finished editing. And she says, did something happen with you and Danny? I didn't ask. You know, you text me, but did something happen? No, Freya, nothing happened, but Danny's never been in my home, and I don't know, I'm just kind of anxious about it. She said, oh, I understand. It's no big deal. Once he comes over, you know, you'll shake that. I was really hoping she would be right, because I wanted to move past it. Danny arrived, we all chilled, it was a good time, we laughed, we talked about everything. It was time for them to go, they left. Fear stayed. The fear stayed with me. I was trying to navigate how to navigate these feelings and emotions. A few weeks later, I was in my living room on my computer, and the statuses started to hit my Facebook page. Yo, police shot somebody in Canfield. I was used to hearing about the police killing people in St. Louis and all the other cities I lived in. I chose to believe that the person who got shot probably did something, and that's why it happened. That's what I believed at the time. But this was different. This was a boy. This was an 18-year-old boy. His body continued to lay in that street, and the images kept flooding my page, and I wanted them to stop. I felt like it was disrespectful to share those images. And then posts like, yo, I'm not saying he deserves to die, but these kids are mad disrespectful. Those words burned in my mind, that any of us could think that way about any of us. I decided to take the streets. I'm a filmmaker and photographer by trade. And by August 12th, I was in those streets, photographing and filming and capturing these images with people who later became the artists. At the time, nobody had a name. We was just out there trying to make some type of change. Danny got back from Canada. He had been gone during this time, texting, saying, "Hey, Z, okay? I'm good, man. I'm doing good." He got back and began to photograph actions himself, and they were never the same actions at the same time. But I worried about it. I kept thinking, what if that had been Danny? Or my brothers? Or my nephews? Or my cousins? That hurt to think. But it also hurt to know that Mike was someone's brother and cousin and son. I didn't know what to do with all of the feelings I had about what was going on with Danny and I realized that when Mike was killed, I immediately was able to see him as a boy taken from our society. I was immediately able to feel compassion for his family and their loss. That meant something to me. And it made me realize that the way that I saw Black men before that moment wasn't in that way. I did not see them fully, and I couldn't understand why. Why so many Black men in my family, yet there seems to be this disconnect for Black men outside of my family. And I wanted to close that gap, to heal that chasm. I began to navigate these feelings that I was having and challenge myself to see things differently. I began to have conversations and critically think about where these thoughts had come from. Why was I so afraid of Black men? Who planted those beliefs in my mind? Because they seemed foreign to me. They didn't belong to me. They weren't mine. And so as I began to do that, I started pouring that energy into my work, into every conversation I had, whether it was social media, whether it was a conversation at a grocery store. It was everything in me. And I began to see Black men differently. I started seeing them everywhere. I mean, loving on little kids, reading stories on the porch, walking with their partners arm in arm. And it struck me, where had these men been all along? Invisible. I had rendered them invisible. And choosing to challenge myself on another level made them visible. Their loveliness, their beauty, their silliness, their gruffness, their gentleness. I began to see them in their wholeness, and I too began to heal. You know, I think that's how everybody deserves to be seen. Whole, complete. Everyone, every single one. Thank you.
Thank you, Aziza Binti and Bree.
Yes.
So why was it important for you to tell this particular story this evening?
It was important for me to tell this particular story because of the amount of shame and hurt that I experienced. I had hoped that if anyone else have been struggling with those things, that they would understand that they weren't alone, and that these thoughts, these beliefs, these were planted, they're not our own. And we can do the work to dismantle that. We can do the work to heal, to let go of that. We need that. That's courageous love. When you can say, I'm afraid. I have these thoughts, I have these feelings, I have this experience, and I want to share, I want to heal, I want to get better. And I'm hoping, I am trusting that that is the case.
Thank you again, Aziza Binti. And as I said earlier, these storytellers have put in hours, tirelessly, on uncovering things that they are even uncomfortable with, and having the courage to bring this to you all. So, I thank you all again, Gregory Carr and Aziza Binti, for sharing your stories for this first half. And we are getting ready to go into our intermission. And in intermission, this area over here, you will find that we have the Living Ferguson, our ribbon wall. So volunteers are going around right now with these cards that you can fill out, because we know in evenings like this, there's a lot that people would like to say. There's a lot that we're feeling. And we would like to give you all an opportunity to participate in this evening with us. So on the card, you will see that there is a prompt for if it's okay for you to be contacted by a reporter, and you can give your name and phone number. And on the back, the question is, how has the death of Michael Brown Jr. impacted your life? So you can feel free to fill this out during the intermission and to place this up on the ribbon wall. Or you can take it home with you, because sometimes a question prompt like this is a lot to think about. And maybe tonight you will be moved to write something like a poem, one word, or maybe even a drawing. But this is your opportunity to share in this evening with us. So I thank you all for listening to our first half, and we'll see you back in about 20 minutes. You know, I always find it really interesting, like how someone can get so much out of you just from one question. And St. Louis Public Radio journalists are really good at that. Because I had an experience with a journalist that surfaced a memory for me that I tried to stuff away and to truly forget it. When I was 19 years old, I was driving down Highway 4064 going west, and I'm a bit squeamish, and somebody's poor dog made its way onto the highway, and its carnage was just strewn across two of the lanes. And I tried to dodge it, because I don't like rolling over dead things. I don't like rolling over anything. And I swerved a bit, and I had a friend in the back seat of the car. So we're just going about. And I looked out my rearview mirror and I saw that a Maryland Heights police officer was then following me. And I paid no mind. You know, I was just like, oh, okay. maybe he'll see like I didn't want to roll over like a dead animal on the highway, so I just kept going about. And then when I got off on Brentwood Road, I noticed that this officer was still following me. And that's when I started having a little bit of pause. And sure enough, by the time I got to the intersection of Manchester and Brentwood, I was pulled over. And the police officer approached the car. And his first question was, why do you have somebody sitting in your back seat? Why are they not in the passenger seat? And I was working at a grocery store at the time. And I was going into like my whole phase of being a vegan. And I had a carton of rice milk that spilled on my passenger seat. And I explained to the officer, well, you know, I don't want my friend sitting on a wet seat, so he's sitting in the back. And he proceeded to ask me, did I have a chauffeur's license? And I was like, no. And he was like, get out of the car. And I was handcuffed at the corner of Brentwood and Manchester at 19 years old for not having a chauffeur's license because I had a friend riding in the back seat of my car because a carton of rice milk spilled on my passenger side seat. I'm in the back of the car crying because I could not understand, how can I get locked up for not having a chauffeur's license? Like no warning, no put some newspaper on your passenger seat and have your friend sit in the passenger seat because you need a chauffeur's license for somebody to be in your back seat. No, that was not the case. And I was ridiculed in the car. And when they took me to the station, the arresting officer proceeded to book me. And as I sat down, face puffy from crying, another officer walked in and also started to chastise me and pulled my hair. And I began to cry again. Then they took my mugshot. And it was interesting how my mother and uncle showed up probably in less than 30 minutes of me being in that station. And somehow I was magically released. No payment, no explanation. But $325 later, because my car was impounded that quickly. And a load of humiliation later, I get home and my mother is screaming mad. And at that moment, I realized that my mother was not mad at me. My mother was deathly afraid because I'm the only girl and I'm the middle child and I'm a split image of my mother. And at that moment, I knew that my mother yelling at me for being out in Brentwood, Maryland Heights had nothing to do with my decisions that day. It had everything to do with the fact that she knew if those police officers chose to, my life could have ended at 19 years old. And when we start looking at these events that have taken place, we tend to think that there's no long tail of history with this. We tend to think that the anger and the frustration somehow is not justified and is not righteous. So as you listen to these stories tonight, I ask of you all to really sit with the layers of the lived histories of each storyteller who is taking the stage. So now I would like to introduce our next storyteller for our second half. Miss Dr. Kat Dannie. AKA Mama Kat.
Hey, Mama Cat.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah. Take your time. Take your time. We got you, Mama Cat.
Growing up in the Bronx tenement, I was number 10 of 11 children. And it was there that I got my first culinary training. It was also there where I learned the healing power of food. I would walk into our Bronx tenement at 1057 Boston Road, and I could smell all kinds of scents in the hallway. But I knew which scent came from apartment 33. And I would walk into the door, and the pots was bang. Moms was in the kitchen throwing down.
Yeah.
Some macaroni and cheese, some greens, smothered steak. Y'all might think I'm a little weird, but my favorite was smothered liver and onions with some rice and string beans.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
It was not unnormal to see neighbors in our house at dinner time all the time. And it includes some of the officers that patrol the area. Because most of them grew up in my neighborhood. I had a friend who was always there for dinner. Her name is Sylvia, and we still friends to this day. Sylvia and I was around each other every day, so you know sometimes y'all start rubbing each other the wrong way, right?
Right.
And so, you know, we got into a little shum-shum. And I went in the house and I was mad. I said, Mama, don't let her come eat. She don't need to eat here no more. I had a whole attitude, all that going on. And my mother turned around and she looked at me and she said, Miss Lady, let me explain something to you. Don't you ever deny anybody a meal. You don't know when the last time they ate. I'm in my 58th year of life and I still carry that with me to this day. It came a time where I left the cocoon of security in the boogie down.
Yeah.
And I moved around the country. And I was blessed to be able to be around people that came from every walk of life from all around the world. And I learned to cook different meals from around the world. That was a dope experience. My husband was a sailor in the United States Navy, so I got to travel. And when he retired, we chose to settle here in Florissant, Missouri. And when I came here, I said, I'm going to go ahead to school, get my culinary degree. And I got in school, and it was everything for me. I just love food. I think it speaks a lot of languages. I think that it heals so much. And so I designed cakes because that's what I do for fun. And August 9th, 2014, I was in my kitchen working on a cake for a client. And I had the TV playing in the background. And you know, I turned around at some point and I saw a young man laying in the middle of the street. And that's a jacked up movie. So I turned around and I kept on going. And I was so into what I was doing, time had passed. And I turned around again and this young man is still in the middle of the street. So, okay, so you got my attention now because this ain't a movie because we didn't go to commercials. I know I don't have HBO. So I turned around and I'm more than 90 degrees outside. It was hot in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all excuse my language, but I'm just going to keep it real.
Mm-hmm.
When I was looking at that, the message that I took was that we're going to let him lay right here so we can keep you niggas in your place.
Mm.
And I got mad.
Mm.
And so I couldn't go nowhere that day because I had to finish this case for this client. But the next day I was boots on ground. I stopped by Sam's Club, got some snacks, because I believe in the healing power of food again.
Mm-hmm.
And I had water, but I couldn't drive close enough with the water, so me and my grandson, we had snacks and we walked through. And we meeting people and we talking and we got signs and we protesting and days is going, because I'm doing this every day. I would go to school at 6 o'clock in the morning. And when I got out of class at 11, I go and cook. And I'm hitting the street. One day, I'm out there and I'm like giving out the stuff and I met a young man. This young man's name was Josh Williams. And Josh said to me, "Can I get some of that?" I'm like, "Sure, shawty." You know, so I get snacks. He said, "My friends want some." So Josh walked me down the street. It was a furniture store lot, and it was a group of young folks that was on this lot. So I'm like, "Yo, what y'all doing?" They was like, "We ain't going home till we get justice for Mike Brown." I'm like, "Yo, right on. So how can I, help y'all out? What can I do?" A young man that I come to know as Dante says to me, "A little home-cooked meal won't hurt nothing." He didn't even know he was speaking my language, right? So I'm like, "All right." So I went home because I told him it was late. I had to go home. I had to go to class. I said, "I'll be back tomorrow." So I came back the next day with spaghetti, salad, and garlic bread. And we sat down. See, I could have just dropped the food off with these young people, but that defeats the whole purpose. We gotta come together if we're gonna win, right? Mm-hmm. So I sat down with these young folks and I broke bread with them. Mm-hmm. And this began a routine. Every day I get out of class, I go cook food, and I bring food out there, and me and my family, it's my new family.
Yeah.
And we sat down and we ate. And that's where the name Mama Cat come from this group of awesome young people. And then, eventually people started going home. You remember it was a time where there was a lull in the protests. Mm-hmm. But these 10 young people kept going every day. I know this because I was out there every day with them. Mm. They would eat dinner when I brought it at 6 o'clock. By 7 o'clock, we marching up and down West Florissant. A lot of the chants that y'all yell all over everywhere, Lost Voices did that.
Yeah.
Eventually, the people started coming back out. Ferguson, October was going down. Mm-hmm. And we had a lot of people. And then people stayed out there this time. It came a time when a non-indictment happened. And the crowd went crazy, right? Mm-hmm. Because it was going down. Yeah. And we kept on going, and we was fighting even harder. Then came the day of December 23rd, 2014. I had just left from South Florissant and went home and was getting ready to go to bed. And I got a phone call from the same young man, Joshua Williams, and he was crying. He said, "Mama, they killed another one of us." And I was like, "Damn." I put my clothes back on, and I went over there to Hanley Road, Hanley and Frost. And this young man was still laying on the ground. But what really angered me was they had his mother standing only feet from his covered body, asking her questions. There was no humanity in it. So when this woman came out, I went and started talking to her. And what I found out is, not only did she not have money to pay her bills, how was she going to bury her baby? So, talking to us, a bunch of us activists, sat down, we talked. And we decided to go ahead and do a fundraiser to help this family. And all the talent came. We got some talented people here. We got some real talented people. Everybody came through. And we raised most of the money. And she was able to bury her baby with dignity and respect. Mm-hmm. Because they deserved it. Yeah. And so it seemed like the police just did open season on young black males in St. Louis, in their space. They was mad because we was in the street. They didn't know how to deal with it, right? That's the way to deal with y'all chill. But as these babies kept dying, we was the ones that was dealing with these families and cooking. See, because a revolutionary act is to provide a repast for a family after they have to leave their baby in the cemetery.
Right, right.
And give them a space to love on each other. And only then can they begin to heal. Not end, but begin. And so we had extra food. And eventually I'm like, okay, where can we go with the food? And one of our fellow activists said, downtown. I didn't know where downtown was, but we went down there. We began to meet some of our unhoused neighbors, which I call them my unhoused family now. But we had a group of activists and we began to go down there and we began to build relationships. And then, during this time, and this is when my organization, Pop Bangers Feed the Body Mission, was born.
Yeah.
Because if we're going to sit here and talk about Black Lives Matter, you better include every black life. And I'm not talking about those of us that have four walls and a roof. But our family, the sky is their roof. And there's no walls to keep them warm at night. But as we go on, we must understand, as Asada Shakur said it best, it is our duty to fight for our freedom.
Yeah.
We got to fight because we ain't done.
Right.
It is our duty to win. I know that day is going to come. And even if it comes when my great-grandson, Rashad, is an adult, we got to have that. We must love and support each other.
Yeah.
We ain't doing that enough now. Only then can we drop the chains that's binding us. I don't know where we going to end, but I know where we began. All because a young man said the world will know my name. Right?
Right.
And he was a catalyst for change. Let not the change be in vain. Thank you so much.
What inspired you to tell this specific story tonight for the 5-year remembrance of the killing of Michael Brown Jr.?
Well, there was a lot of things that inspired me. A lot of people, all of y'all here. And I felt that it was important to talk about how we can start somewhere, but we don't have to stay there. See, when we get out in the street and do our mission every Thursday night, it's because we know we need to lift up everybody. We can't go nowhere without each other. So if telling this story to you all tonight is a call to action, let it be so. That's all I got to say.
All right.
Leg up.
Good job, man.
And we are now coming to the end of our program. But last and surely not least, I would like to bring up storyteller Dannie Boyd.
Good evening, people. How are you doing?
Good evening.
Oh, Dannie Boyd. Oh, Dannie Boyd. That was the song that my grade school gym teacher used to sing every time that he saw me. Hearing that short, stocky little white man sing that song made me feel like I was his favorite student. I was athletic, I was a good participator, and I was even one of 2 black boys in my first grade class, so I felt like he had to know that I existed. Each time I would see him, he would always sing that song in the hallways, and I would get excited and inspired. And then one day, I grew up and I went to middle school and I became a teenager. And the first time I saw him after I grew up and became a teenager in middle school, I started to approach him at one of our school dances as that same little black boy that I thought I still was that had that song in my head. And when I saw him, the look that he gave me was, "You're not that anymore." The way I felt when I saw the look on his face said that you're one of them now. You're one of those troublesome black men. And I knew he recognized me because I could see it in his face. But I could also see that he didn't want to recognize me. And in that moment, the little black boy inside of me died. And at the age of 12 years old, I learned that white men believed they had the privilege to determine who I was going to be. So there I was, August 10, 2014. I was staring at the most beautiful full moon that I'd ever seen. It hung low enough from the sky to touch the lake that was directly in front of me, and that lake looked like it was the edge of the world, and I could touch it from the beach that I was standing on. I felt the calmest that I had ever felt in my life because I was over 1,000 miles away from all the chaos that was happening in St. Louis. You see, my perspective of that moon was from Toronto. I found myself there in search of new opportunities because I felt like some of those opportunities weren't available here at home. Being amongst the diverse group of population that was there, seeing all the different ethnicities made me feel at home. I felt free to be me. The day before, August 9th, I got a text message from one of my best friends, and she was saying that there had been a shooting in Ferguson. Now, I was in Toronto, so I didn't want to use up my international data. So I couldn't respond to her. So I decided to get on social media and see what was going on. And when I logged in, literally every one of my timelines was filled with the burning North County. My North County. You see, that quick trip that was on fire sat directly in front of the townhome that I grew up in the first 2 years of my life. That same gas station was down the street from where one of my best friends lived, and around the corner and a couple of blocks down, Chambers, from where I lived since 1992. The moment I saw all of those pictures, the comfort that I had in Toronto began to fall apart. 26 years of living in North County, and at no point have I ever felt helpless to be in my community. So there I was, August 10th, staring at the most beautiful full moon that I'd ever seen. And I felt free. Thinking about the bondage that had taken the life of Michael Brown Jr., I wasn't a part of that anymore. I was free. And I began to ask myself, why should I go back? You see, for the entire year of 2014, I dreamed of moving to Toronto, and the only thing I had to do to make that dream come true was to miss my flight back home. I had a decision to make. I decided to come home. 6 days after the quick trip had burned down, I found myself riding up Chambers right past this church to go to West Florissant to see what actually happened in the Knights of Ferguson for myself. I've always been an adventurous person, out until 3 o'clock in the morning taking pictures in cities. So on August 15th, which was a Friday, I decided that that was the day I was going to see for myself what was going on. So I was riding up Chambers thinking I was going to make a left turn on West Florissant, and the first thing I saw was all this traffic. Of all my years of living in North County, I had never seen that much traffic going down West Florissant. I ended up having to park my car in the lot where the Walgreens used to be, and I walked a mile all the way from Chambers down to Quick Trip. And as I began to walk, I started to see people that looked like me, young black people, riding in their cars, and their radios were really loud, like really loud. And then I began to notice people were hanging out of windows, and they were riding on the rooftops of cars, and I felt this energy that I never knew could exist in that moment. And I began to get excited. I was running down West Florissant trying to grab every single shot that I get. And every time I passed the car, somebody would yell out, "Hey, yo, cuz, get this picture."
Yeah.
And so I started taking pictures, and I decided that I wanted to use my long lens so I can get isolation of the subjects from the rest of the background, because I wanted to tell a unique story based on those people in that car. So after about 15 minutes of these AO photos, I finally made it to the picture.
Yeah.
And the first thing I noticed was peace. There weren't any riots, there was no fire, there was no tear gas, there wasn't even a clearly contrasted line of people versus the police when I got there. It felt like every single black person in the city of St. Louis was there. The elders, the young people, men, women, parents with their children were there. It seemed like every single black person in St. Louis was there because something about what Darren Wilson represented had a hold on them. Whether it was the unjust traffic tickets and traffic stops, or whether it was the fact that every last one of us had to show up on one corner in North County just to get the rest of the city to hear us. But it was all done with love. The closer I got to the Quick Trip, the more I began to feel this warm embrace of love. That same love led a man to set up a drum set underneath the Quick Trip Pavilion and start playing. It made me feel like I was at the May Day parade, the way you feel the drum lines pulsating through your body. He was playing along with all the people that were chanting, "Hands up, don't shoot." And so originally, I thought I was just going down there to observe, to just hide behind my camera and take pictures. But I felt myself being drawn into that moment. The more we began to chant, notice I said we, not them, it became about us. And I realized I was a part of this movement. Every time I fixed my mouth to yell the words, "hands up," I could feel the existence of my soul pulsating through my body and connecting with theirs.
Yeah.
I was so caught up in the euphoria of us that I never even stopped to think about how misleading the media had been. You see, when I looked on social media, I thought I would see flames and broken glass. But there was none of that. There was people just like me, and they were my community. And in that moment, I was glad I decided to come home and capture those moments for my friends and myself. But somebody wasn't glad I did. 2 years after that night, I decided to submit one of my photos taken during that night to an exhibit called Freedom Imagine, Freedom Live, that was at Dannie Boyd University. The photo that I chose to submit was of an activist who was dressed like a police officer. He had one of those kind of basic, not really undercover, but the casual kind of shirt that police wear that's a t-shirt but it just says police written across the top. But underneath it, he had written the phrase, killing our kids. And he also had the police officer's hat. And on that hat, he had written the word murderer. And then he also had a chain handcuffed to his wrist. And he was carrying a law dictionary. The moment I saw him weaving in and out of those cars going down Explorer, I knew I had to take his picture. I began following him from car to car, trying to match pace with him until we made eye contact. And in that moment, I knew that he wanted me to take his picture. So there we were, standing in between all these cars, and I'm lining him up with my camera, and I'm shooting. And my pictures were out of focus. Because it was so dark, my camera was having difficulty getting focus of him. So the first 6 shots that I took were either out of focus or they were blurry. But that 7th shot was perfect. I managed to catch him posed in this broken salute. And it felt like a miracle because I chose not to look at my image for a year because I wanted to make sure I had the clarity to see what was there. So when I was scrolling through my images, I saw blurry, out of focus, blurry. And then this miracle that was shot was the one I decided to submit to this exhibit. And I felt nervous about it because Lindenwood is in St. Charles. And St. Charles is kind of conservative. Or at least that's what I believe.
Understood.
And so I had this dialogue with myself, with my friend Aziza, with my cousin. Can I really submit this photo? And I eventually did. So a month after the exhibit closed, I was having a conversation with the curator, and she told me, someone was offended by your photo. And that someone was a police officer. And in that moment, I kind of laughed. Because I thought to myself, in big, bold letters, there's the phrase, freedom live, freedom imagine. You knew what you was getting into when you came to that show. And so, the more I thought about it, the more I thought back to my experience I had with my gym teacher. And how I learned that white men have this belief that they can determine what and who is legitimate. And so going through the process of experiencing Ferguson, I found a new sense of power in my community that I never knew was here. I had to go away and not be present just to be able to find that power. And that power brought me a sense of healing that I never would have imagined could have come to me. And I was able to share it in pictures with friends and with family. And what I realized is having the courage to show a photo to someone that may feel differently than you feel and be okay with it can bring you a sense of joy. And that sense of joy that I found was the feeling of the little black boy inside of me being reborn. Thank you. chose this story, basically, just as the story said, I was not here when Ferguson started. I was out of the country. And so the last memory I had pre-Ferguson was being dropped off at the airport by my father. And I remember kind of having that awkward hug with him because he didn't want to be a little sensitive and say, hey, like, I'm going to miss my son. I'm shipping him off to like a completely different country. We don't know people. And so that was the last memory I had of St. Louis pre-Ferguson. And so the day I got back, which was probably around the 13th or so of August, I remember riding down 170 and the city just felt completely different. And literally from that moment up until this point, I felt this disconnect from my city. And I'm like, I've lived here all my life. Like, how do I not feel connected to my city? And so this story was important to me because it was a point of healing for me, of being able to put it down on paper, to put it in audio form, and be able to release that. And also realizing that in addition to the things that I felt, there are other people that have felt things over these past 5 years. And it doesn't matter, who you believe, whose side you're on, but the fact of the matter is everybody feels something based on what is happening over these, on August 9th. And I wanted to be the catalyst to say, hey, like, we need to like check ourselves and we need to let go of some of the things that we face because we can't move forward until we let go of some of the hurt.
Because I am vertically challenged.
I would like to thank you all for attending this evening. And in this moment, because we have invoked the name of Michael Brown Jr., out of respect for his lived experience, out of respect for his mother and father, I would like for us to take a moment of silence for the lived life and the death of Michael Brown Jr. Thank you to Greater St. Mark Church. For hosting this event, because many of us know that this place, this sanctuary that we are standing in, and the building next door, was pivotal and an important part of what became known as the Ferguson Uprising. I would like to thank St. Louis Public Radio for hosting this event. And at this moment, I would like producer Eli Chin Jolly and Yang, Treasure Shields Redmond, Jackie Jermaine, Dee Nichols, Darian Wakefall, and Andrew Washington. Last name is Washington. Had to correct myself. It has been my honor to be your host this evening. My name is Shiraz Gorman. God bless you all, and good night. And I would ask you all to please walk in love. Thank you. My bad.
Ain't that?
1 second. I need the mic back. Mic back. Mic back. Okay, everybody? Everybody? Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
I forgot to thank the most important people this evening. Let's bring back up our storytellers. It was an absolute honor to work with all of these storytellers. The courage that it took for them to shape this word, to see where the point it came to tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.